Yeah, I'm honored to talk a little bit about a neat little attack that we found within the SSH protocol. We called it the Terrapin attack, breaking SSH channel integrity by sequence number manipulation. This is joint work with my co-authors Markus Brinkmann and Jörg Schwenk. And to start things off, I would like you to imagine the internet nowadays. So users access public services using TLS encrypted connections, for example, websites or their emails. Now, what's often a little bit forgotten is that these servers are managed using SSH by an administrator with high privileges. So in this case, root privileges. Now, what we will now look at is an attack that will focus on this very SSH connection, and we assume that we will have a man-in-the-middle in this case here. Now, the SSH protocol is split into separate layers. So we have everything built on top of the TCP/IP protocol stack, and on top of that, we have the transport layer protocol, or TLP for short, which in itself is split into the binary packet protocol as a generic transport protocol for all other SSH protocol layers, and the SSH handshake. On top of that, we have the authentication protocol, which performs client authentication. So this is where you usually find the password or public key authentication. And on top of that, we have the connection protocol, which is responsible for all the application layer features that SSH offers. Now, I would like you to look at a typical SSH protocol flow. And what you can see here is a client and a server that perform an SSH handshake. So they will start off by exchanging their protocol version, and after that, they will perform what's called a kex init. With the kex init messages, they do exchange lists of different algorithms, and based on that, they can then determine which algorithms to use for a connection. In this case, they decided they will be using a Diffie-Hellman key exchange, so they simply perform a very out-of-the-book Diffie-Hellman key exchange. So the client sends over its ephemeral public key, and the server responds to it with its ephemeral public key, as well as a long-term public key PKS, which is also known as a host key, and a signature to authenticate the handshake, as well as the server against the client. After this, they will both send an indicator message, new keys, to signal that they will now be using these derived keys. Eventually, the client will then request a new service, for example, in this case, user authentication, which is the default, and the server might send a few extensions before that. Now, the paper name already gave it away that we will attack the SSH protocol by manipulating sequence numbers. So to start things off, we first need to understand how sequence numbers work in the SSH protocol. Now, sequence numbers in SSH are implicit, which means that they are not transferred over the transport, but rather counted on each side separately. This is done by each side keeping their own counter for sent and received messages. And whenever a message is sent or received, the corresponding count is incremented by 1. Now, you might notice that there are some sequence numbers which are highlighted in bold underline. Those are the sequence numbers that are actually authenticated by the client or the server using a MAC, which is computed as part of the message. So as long as the sequence numbers that are highlighted in bold underline match, the connection can continue no matter what. So the SSH protocol is rather complex. There are a lot of optional messages, and one such message is the ignore message. Now, the ignore message, as the name suggests, is supposed to be ignored. And this is not the only message of this type, so there are multiple messages which can be used for this purpose, but we will stick to ignore here. Now, an important observation is that this optional message is not protected by the server's signature. So the signature is actually only computed over a fixed subset of message fields, and this ignore message is not part of it. As such, if we now assume that we have a man-in-the-middle attacker, we could say the man-in-the-middle attacker will simply inject this ignore message into the handshake. Now, obviously, this does not work that easily because, if you have a look, the sequence numbers get out of sync here. The send counter of the server is not being incremented while the receive counter of the client is. And then as soon as the server sends over its extension info message, you can see that it is sent under sequence number 3, but verified under sequence number 4, which then causes the connection to terminate. Now, the man-in-the-middle attacker can rather simply fix this by dropping the message that caused this problem in the first place. So simply dropping the message here causes the sequence numbers to realign. As you can see, the next message that is sent by the server, the service accept message, is now being sent under the same sequence number and verified under the same sequence number as before. This is already a cryptographically successful attack because we have broken the channel integrity of the SSH protocol here. Usually, the SSH protocol is designed to protect against such attacks, so simply removing a message should be detected by either client or server. Now, to understand the practical implications of this attack, we have to have a look at the message that we removed from the connection. Now, the extension info message is a rather simple message. It contains protocol extensions in key value format. And we identified 2 extensions that actually did have practical impact. For one, the server SIGIX extension, and on the other hand, the ping@openssh.com extension. Other extensions were not considered because they didn't have any noticeable security impact. So the server SIGIX extension contains a list of public key algorithms that is used by the client for user authentication and is commonly used to enable RSA-2 support. Consequently, if we remove the extension or the extension info message in general, we can cause the client to fall back to RSA-SHA-1. Similar thing with the ping@openssh.com extension, which is used to obscure keystroke timing attacks or keystroke timings. As such, if we disable it, we can once again perform keystroke timing attacks on the connection. Now, everything that we have seen so far only required specification flaws. So there's nothing that the implementation did wrong. This is a specification bug. However, we can use our attack to leverage implementation bugs and escalate impact. And one such example that we found was with a client called async SSH, which is the Python implementation for SSH. And as you can see here, we replaced the ignore message with an extension info message. So in this case, we gain full control over the extension info message. We also found a more sophisticated attack where we actually were able to lock a client into an attacker-controlled account without the client noticing that. And because of how shells work in SSH, we can then consequently perform phishing attacks and similar things. Now, removing this message from within the secret channel can cause problems depending on the encryption mode, because subsequent message decryption may be affected by that. What we found is that 3 of the most common modes that are used by the SSH protocol are affected by this. So we have the CHA-20 poly 1305 with roughly 2/3 of all servers supporting it, and this is perfectly exploitable. So 100% success rate without countermeasure that you can exploit it. Now, we also have the encrypt then make modes, and for counter encrypt then make, we found that an exploitation is possible, but unlikely to continue over a longer connection, because with every message, the success rate decreases. And for CBC ETM, we have a limited exploitability, So we had a success rate ranging between 0.03% up to 83%, depending a little bit on the specifics there. Now, how can we mitigate our attack? We suggested two mitigations. For one, to reset the sequence numbers at key installation, which actually allows or takes the attacker's capability away to manipulate the sequence numbers. And the second thing that we suggested was to authenticate the entire handshake transcript to thwart message injection into the handshake. OpenSSH picked up on this, and they implemented something which they called strict checks. And strict checks does exactly what we suggested, at least for one part. They do reset the sequence numbers, but on the other hand, they did not perform a cryptographic countermeasure by authenticating the handshake transcript, but rather they hardened the handshake to disallow unexpected messages. So basically, any message that is not strictly required for key exchange will now terminate the connection. Since our disclosure, roughly 30 or over 30 unique implementations already support strict checks. And if you have a look at Shodan or similar sites, you will find that roughly 11 million servers today support strict checks as a countermeasure. Now, what have we seen? So Terrapin is a cryptographic attack, a novel cryptographic attack that targets the SSH channel integrity. It can be exploited in practice to downgrade security. But what's even more interesting is that it can be used to exploit state machine vulnerabilities if they are present in the implementation. Affected modes are among the most common, SHA-20, poly1305, as well as encrypt then make modes. And last but not least, this is something that I have not mentioned yet, all of these modes that we found the attack worked on were proven secure in previous works. And this is because they made assumptions that were not consistent with what's actually been done in practice. So we designed the strict checks countermeasure to allow these proofs to be reapplied. So there's no need for additional proofs here. The old proofs still hold. And with this, I would like to conclude my talk, and I'm happy to take any questions.